I thought it was just another quiet evening with a delivery at my door, but one unexpected question from a pizza delivery driver changed the way I looked at a simple knock, and maybe even at myself. Stay with me, because this moment led somewhere I never imagined. Before we begin, let me ask you something. From which city are you watching us today? I always love reading where everyone is tuning in from. And if stories like this speak to you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. It truly helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. It was one of those evenings where the house feels louder because it's too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after years of living, raising kids, and then watching them build lives of their own somewhere else. I was standing in my kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator keeping me company, when I realized I didn't feel like cooking. That alone felt like a small rebellion. I picked up my phone, ordered a pizza from the place down the road, and went back to the living room with a book I wasn't really reading. I remember the light outside had that late afternoon gold, the kind that makes dust in the air look almost thoughtful. My house is modest, but it's full of memories. Family photos on the wall, a couch that has seen too many naps, and a front door that has welcomed people in and watched them leave. When the doorbell rang, it startled me more than it should have. I set the book down, smoothed my sweater without thinking, and walked to the door. When I'd opened it, there he was, the pizza delivery driver. Young, but not careless. Polite in a way that felt genuine, not rushed. He held the pizza box like it was something important, not just dinner. We exchanged the usual words, the weather, the total, nothing special. I reached for my wallet, and that's when he paused. He didn't hand me the pizza right away. Instead, he looked at me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but as if he was deciding whether to say something. I noticed the porch light flickering above us, the smell of warm bread and tomato sauce drifting between us, and the distant sound of a car passing by. "Can I ask you something?" he said. It caught me off guard. I laughed softly, more out of habit than humor. "About the pizza?" I asked. "No," he said, quickly adding, "I mean, if that's okay." I hesitated for just a second. At my age, you learn to trust your instincts, and mine told me this wasn't anything to fear. "All right," I said. "You can ask." He shifted his weight, glanced at the street, and then back at me. "Do you ever feel like life slowed down before you were ready?" The question landed heavier than I expected. It wasn't what I thought he'd ask. Not even close. For a moment, the pizza didn't matter. The house behind me, the years I'd lived, the plans I'd made, and the ones that quietly disappeared, all seemed to gather at the doorway. "Yes," I said finally. "I do." He nodded, like my answer mattered. "I see it sometimes," he said. "In people's houses, the way they open the door. Yours felt calm, but also like there's more you haven't said yet." No one had spoken to me like that in a long time. Not with curiosity, not with respect. I realized then that this conversation wasn't about age or roles. It was about two people meeting in a small moment, both carrying questions. We stood there longer than necessary. I told him about how this house once felt too full, and now sometimes felt too empty. He listened without interrupting. He told me he was working his way through school, unsure of where he was headed, but aware that time moved differently depending on where you stood. When I finally took the pizza from his hands, our fingers didn't linger. There was nothing dramatic about it, but something had shifted inside me. He smiled, thanked me for listening, and walked back to his car. I watched until he pulled away, the sound of the engine fading down the street. I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, pizza box warm in my arms. The house was quiet again, but it felt different. Less heavy. I realized that sometimes growth doesn't come from big events. Sometimes it comes from a simple question, asked at the right time, by someone you never expected. That night, as I sat at my table eating alone, I thought about how many doors I'd opened in my life, and how many moments I might have rushed past. And I wondered what might happen if I stayed open just a little longer next time someone knocked. The next few days passed more slowly than usual, as if the house itself was thinking about that conversation. I kept replaying his question in my mind while doing ordinary things. Folding laundry, watering the small plant by the window, driving to the grocery store and back. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet something inside me felt gently stirred, like a pond after a stone has sunk to the bottom. I told myself it was silly to think about a delivery driver I'd spoken to for less than 10 minutes. Life had taught me to keep things in proportion. Still, I noticed how alert I felt, how present. That question had reminded me that I wasn't finished simply because certain chapters of my life were behind me. On Thursday evening, I found myself ordering pizza again. Not because I was hungry for it, but because I was curious about myself. I wondered if I was hoping he'd be the one to knock again. When the doorbell rang, my heart gave a small, embarrassing jump. It wasn't him. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment that surprised me. I thanked the driver, took the box, and closed the door. That night, I laughed quietly at myself. At 40-something, nearing 60 faster than I liked to admit, I still had these unexpected reactions. Maybe that was the point. A week later, I ran into him by accident. I was at the local market, the kind with narrow aisles and familiar faces. I was comparing labels on soup cans when I heard a voice behind me say, "Hi." I turned, and there he was, holding a basket with a few groceries, looking just as surprised to see me. "You're the pizza house," he said, then quickly corrected himself. "I mean, I remember your door." I smiled. "I remember your question." We both laughed, the awkwardness easing into something comfortable. We stood there talking between the shelves about nothing important at first. The weather, the neighborhood, how busy the store was for a weekday afternoon. Then the conversation found its way back to deeper ground, naturally, without effort. He told me he was taking a break from deliveries that week, trying to figure out his next steps. I told him I was learning how to enjoy quieter days without feeling like they were empty. We didn't rush each other. There was no sense of expectation, just two people sharing space. Before we parted, he asked if it would be all right to stop by sometime, not as a delivery, but just to talk. He was careful with his words, respectful. I appreciated that more than I could say. "Yes," I said after a moment. "I'd like that." That evening, as I sat by the window watching the sky fade into evening, I felt a calm certainty. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't about filling a gap or chasing a feeling. It was about allowing myself to be seen again and seeing someone else in return. And that, I realized, was a kind of growth I hadn't known I still needed. He came by the following Sunday afternoon, just as the light was beginning to soften again, the way it had the first evening we met. I noticed how carefully he parked, not blocking the driveway, as if he wanted to be sure he wasn't taking up more space than he should. When I opened the door, there was no pizza box this time. Just him, standing there with his hands loosely folded, wearing a clean jacket and an expression that suggested he'd thought about this visit more than once. "Thank you for saying yes," he said. "Thank you for asking the right way," I replied, and I meant it. I invited him in, and for a moment we both seemed aware of the house around us. I apologized automatically for the quiet, then stopped myself. "It's usually like this," I said. "I've learned not to apologize for it." He nodded, looking around without prying. "It feels lived in," he said. "In a good way." We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten pizza alone not long ago. I poured coffee, and he declined sugar, smiling when I remembered that detail from our brief talk at the store. The conversation didn't rush. It unfolded. He told me about growing up nearby, about watching his parents work hard and worry quietly. I shared pieces of my own life, choosing my words carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect for myself. At one point, he asked what I missed most about earlier years. I thought for a long time before answering. Being needed, I said finally. Not in a dramatic way, just knowing that someone expected me at a certain time for a certain reason. He listened, really listened, not trying to fix anything. He said that sometimes he worried about rushing through his own life without noticing it, that he felt pressure to become someone impressive instead of someone content. I saw then that despite the years between us, we were standing on similar ground, just at different distances from the horizon. The afternoon slipped by. The coffee went cold. Outside, a neighbor walked a dog, and the sound of footsteps faded down the sidewalk. When he stood to leave, there was a pause, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. "I'm glad I knocked on your door that day," he said. "So am I answered. After he left, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I sat there, hands wrapped around my mug, feeling something steady settle in my chest. This wasn't about rewriting the past or borrowing someone else's future. It was about acknowledging that connection doesn't belong to one age, and curiosity doesn't expire. That night, I wrote in a journal I hadn't opened in years. Not to record him, but to record myself. The questions I still had, the things I was learning to name. I realized that growth wasn't loud or sudden. Sometimes it arrived quietly, like a knock on the door you almost didn't answer. Weeks turned into months, and our visits became a gentle rhythm in my life. Not scheduled, not expected, but always welcomed. He would knock, sometimes with a story from his day, sometimes with nothing more than a smile, and I would open the door, ready for conversation or quiet companionship. Life had a new texture now, subtle but undeniable, and it surprised me how much I had been missing it without realizing. One late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of rose and lavender, he arrived with a small notebook tucked under his arm. "I thought I might show you something," he said, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of curiosity and hesitancy. We settled at the kitchen table, the sun spilling across the worn wood, and he began to read snippets of his writing, reflections on life, observations on people, and little moments that often went unnoticed. I listened, captivated not just by the words, but by the way he saw the world, the way he noticed details that mattered. I realized then that what had begun with a simple question at my door had grown into something far deeper: mutual recognition. We weren't trying to fix each other, or even to define a relationship in traditional terms. We were simply seeing each other, fully and honestly, without the need for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. In his presence, I felt lighter, more aware, more connected to my own thoughts and feelings than I had in years. One evening, as twilight settled over the neighborhood and the air carried the faint scent of evening blossoms, we sat on the small porch with mugs of tea. Neither of us spoke at first. The world around us hummed softly, the distant chatter of neighbors, the rustle of leaves, the faint creak of a swing in someone's yard. Then he said, almost in passing, "I think I understand now. Life doesn't always slow down. Sometimes it just waits for the right person to notice it." I turned to him, surprised by the clarity of the thought. "I think you're right," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush past the quiet, to fill the gaps with noise or distraction. I simply felt grateful for his presence, for my own openness, for the small yet profound ways life could surprise me. When he left that night, I lingered by the door, watching him walk down the street. I felt no sadness, no longing, just a quiet sense of fulfillment, as if a door had opened inside me and remained open, allowing light to enter that had long been kept at bay. That night, I reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple knock and a strange, honest question. I realized that growth and connection can arrive in the most unexpected ways, sometimes from the people we least expect, and that the courage to answer the door, to be seen, can lead to discoveries about ourselves we didn't know we were ready to make. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, but nothing felt quite ordinary anymore. The house, once heavy with silence, now held space for reflection, laughter, and gentle companionship. I had learned that even small moments, shared honestly, could change the way we move through the world. And as I prepared for each new day, I carried with me the reminder that some knocks are worth answering, some questions are worth listening to, and that the doors we open can lead us to unexpected but deeply meaningful places.